This title of this session is Change Starts and Stops with Us. But why is change so hard? I know there are management consultants who would charge you a lot of money to hold your hand through the process of change. We know that change is not easy, but some of the questions we asked this morning is, whose job is it? How do we know when it's finished? How do we start it? Where is this change going? Can we start a change without knowing where it's going? So we're going to explore the process of change, and to guide us through it and give us some inspiration, I'm really privileged and have the honor to introduce Francesca Cavallo, who's a best-selling author of Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, the founder and CEO of Undercats, and one of the 2019 European Young Leaders. But most importantly, when I asked Francesca how she would like me to introduce her, she said her goal in life, and I share it, I'm sure we all do, is to radically increase the diversity in children's media. Now, I'm the mum of a 6- and an 8-year-old boy, and that we desperately need some diversity in our children's media. So all power to your elbow, Francesca. Let's hear more about the process of change.
Good morning.
Microphone.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Friends of Europe, for the kind invitation to speak again before an audience of such inspiring and committed leaders who are doing their best to navigate the mind-bending challenge of climate change. I am a children's book author and a media entrepreneur. I am convinced that the stories we tell ourselves, that the stories we tell each other, have a dramatic impact on our lives, on our democracies, and on our planet. Stories influence us heavily on a personal level and on a collective level. And that is why today I am going to argue that if we have learned to live a life that is not sustainable for ourselves and for the planet, that means that we chose to believe stories that are unsustainable. I am going to argue that for our economies to be sustainable, we need more sustainable stories. But how do we recognize a story that is sustainable? What makes a story sustainable? Are we talking about stories about recycling? No. It's not the topic that makes a story sustainable. It's the kind of human we want to be after reading it. It has been clear for decades now that we must put an end to the predatory behavior that we have had towards our natural resources. To stop behavior that seems so ingrained in our culture, though, we must understand how we came to believe that exploiting nature was such a good idea. As Europeans, what kind of stories have we told ourselves that have enabled this kind of behavior? As a colonial superpower, over the past few centuries, we have trained ourselves to define success as the ability to appropriate as many resources as we could. We celebrated conquerors who did everything in their power to amass the biggest possible amounts of wealth and power. We called those violent expeditions exploring, and we called the men who murdered and raped and stole from indigenous people adventurers. I am not that old, and in elementary school, I still studied Columbus as one of the most admirable Italian heroes of all times. I am baffled because in the United States, there is an ongoing debate about teaching critical race theory in schools, and there hasn't been a similar debate in Europe, despite the fact that we wrote the book on colonialism. Learning to live sustainably means to come to terms with the fact that each of us is a small part in a system that has to work for everyone. It means that we need to stop looking for inspiration on how to bend the system to make it work for us better than for anyone else, as countries and as individuals. There can't be real sustainability in a system that's rooted in oppression. It isn't easy. The stories we grew up surrounded by didn't just lay the foundation of our collective culture. They also laid the foundation of how we see our personal success. In the past, we celebrated emperors able to subjugate entire countries. Today, we celebrate entrepreneurs who build monopolies. In the past, we bowed to men who financed wars and polluted the earth to make money from oil. Today, we clap ecstatically at businessmen who amass staggering amounts of money and send rockets to space while lobbying to keep taxes for the rich at an all-time low. With those heroes and their stories in mind, we read books that inspire us to want more from our careers, more from our productivity, and we structure our lives around the belief that to be accomplished, we need to be constantly overworked. We are a room of leaders. As leaders, the way we live our life is a tale in and of itself. People use our life stories to get guidance and understand how they should live their lives. People look up to us, and we want them to see that we're busy, rich, and powerful. We want them to see that we're rich and powerful because we have been so busy, and that makes us worthy of admiration and envy. We have learned to reward ourselves and others when we are able to appropriate more resources. We have learned to value people based on the amount of power and money they were able to amass. We've written books, made movies, designed schools, created company incentives based on narratives that have been proven to be toxic for our health and our planet. To live sustainably means to make room for everybody, to make sure that the available resources are equally distributed. It means to step out of a culture of exploitation and to step in a culture that is rooted in inclusion. We have learned to consume the earth. We have learned to consume ourselves. We have learned to discriminate against anyone who could threaten our right to explore nature and fellow humans. The good news is that what has been learned can be unlearned. We can break free from the chains that we built. There is a quote that opens one of my favorite books of all times, Da cosa nasce cosa, by the Italian master of design, Bruno Munari. The quote is from Lao Tzu. To give birth, to nourish, to bring forth without taking possession, to produce without appropriation, to create without controlling. That is the hidden virtue. For centuries, we have trained ourselves to value control, appropriation, and possession over creation, production, nourishment. Now, it's time to evolve and to use the privilege we have acquired through centuries of colonialism and oppression to lead a transition that can't happen on a collective level if it doesn't happen on an individual level first. As leaders of a green transition, how can we inspire people to change their life if we are not willing to radically change our own? How can we be responsible for others when we are not wearing our own oxygen mask? To build the necessary political capital we need to make the transition we are called to make, we need to tell ourselves and each other better stories. We need more sustainable dreams. Many of you may dismiss my remarks as naive. I'm a children's book author, after all. You may say that to accumulate, to want insane amounts of power, of money, of influence is just human nature. But is it? Is it human nature to destroy ourselves and nature? Or have we trained ourselves to believe it's natural to want these things? Many of the societies and cultures that we have exterminated were not built on the exploitation of other humans and of nature's resources. To justify colonialism, we told ourselves the lie that society is modeled around the concept of ladders, and that the more you climb, the best you'll feel, because the more you climb, the more likely you are to be an oppressor rather than one of the oppressed. Exactly. What part of this sounds natural to you? To build a greener, more inclusive world, we need to dismantle the structures of oppression and exploitation that we created. We need to deal with our colonial past and with the deformities that we have internalized to justify the sheer terror, the violence, and the injustice we have disseminated on this planet for centuries. We need to ask ourselves what would happen if we stopped dreaming of building empires and we started dreaming of being valuable members of our community. What would happen if we stopped chasing ever-growing careers and we started giving power away to focus on a more sustainable lifestyle? When I started building my new company, Undercats, I started toying around with the concept of an ecology of dreams. Every day, I tried to sort between the dreams that I was trained to dream by a system of oppression and the dreams that are closer to my truest self. A self that wants to live in harmony with nature. A self that knows that I don't need to make €1 billion to be valuable. A self that knows that I don't carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. That I am a small part of a much bigger universe. A self that wants to be radical about change, honest about my origins, and determined to build a better future. Every day, I ask myself what it means to build a sustainable company, one that is sustainable for me, for my employees, for the planet, and for my audience. It's not easy. This exercise requires a gigantic amount of discipline, because like you, I grew up in a world that trained me to believe that speaking like this means that you curbed your ambition, that you're less hungry and less foolish than the others, thus less valuable to the system. These voices bruise my ego constantly. But the kind of change we need demands us to start rewarding ourselves and others every time we produce without appropriation. We bring forth without taking possession. We create without controlling. To guide ourselves first and then the others out of the system of oppression that we built. If each of us individually starts questioning their way of inhabiting the system, we can create space for more people to be part of it. We can make space for new ideas to emerge, and maybe we can repair some of the damage and pain that we caused and continue to cause worldwide. By bringing forth without taking possession, by producing without appropriation, by creating without controlling, we can stop the cycle of oppression. We can move past the toxic heritage of our colonial past, and we can lead a sustainable, democratic revolution that will bring us closer to ourselves, to our communities, and to the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I don't think there's anything that anyone could add to that that would not take away from your message. I think it was so important. And you encourage us to reflect on the stories we tell ourselves as individuals, as families, as societies, and this is part of the human story. And as you said, anything that can be learnt can be unlearnt. And I think this is a good theme for us to reflect on through the whole of today when we're looking at how the recovery takes us forward, what we want from it, what the values are, and how we embody that in our actions. So thank you very much, Francesca, for giving us that thoughtful introduction.